The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you another tip from the pages of 100 More Orchestration Tips. In the past few orchestration challenges, I found that many orchestrators vastly overestimate the Celesta's dynamic range and powers of projection. Here are a few observations to help get your Celesta scoring back on track. The Celesta's dynamic range is as limited as that of the harp, and should be scored with care. Sometimes it's the footnotes and the by-the-ways that come back to haunt a composer's early orchestral efforts. None is more potentially deadly to the intentions of a score than ignoring the mild observations in orchestration manuals that the Celesta is a soft instrument, which is easily overwhelmed in a texture. This can often prove confusing to a composer who's been brought up on film music, in which the cues have been carefully mixed so that certain textures sound beautifully balanced, which would not work in a live performance. Celesta is often the culprit in such audio mixes, glittering bravely over a morass of winds, brass, and percussion without any diminishment of its role. YouTube demonstrations are no help either. Celesta, just like harp, has a tendency to generously inhabit a nearby microphone, giving the impression that the instrument is actually quite loud. But just position that microphone a few meters away, and the environment will quickly absorb much of the resonance, especially in a concert hall. Playing the instrument with more force makes little to no difference. The great boogie pianist, Meade Lux Lewis, played Celesta occasionally. In his classic track, Dollhouse Boogie, the muscularity of his playing is evident as he hammers through the piece, first on piano, then trading over to Celesta and back. As you can hear on the recording though, hitting Celesta keys very hard merely creates a kind of slapping sound, but doesn't necessarily make the instrument any louder. Once again, microphone positioning helps to balance the piano with the Celesta. This is not to say that the instrument is devoid of nuance, far from it. But its nuance is over a far lower range of dynamics than the average orchestral dynamic. To really hear its full range, you would have to listen to Celesta in a chamber music context. Like in the Quarteto Simbólico by Villa-Lobos, the framing music for this video. This mysterious, impressionistic work is scored for flute, alto saxophone, harp, and Celesta, plus a chorus of wordless women's voices. The harp and Celesta set a certain softer range of dynamics, down to which the winds and voices adjust. The only thing that comes close to this level of sensitivity in the standard orchestral repertoire is Bartók's music for strings, percussion, and Celesta. In almost every passage of Celesta solo, Bartók scales down the dynamics of the string orchestra and percussion to allow the player to explore their part with greater expression. Only occasionally does he over-optimistically score the Celesta into a loud combination, and then it's mostly for textural color rather than due to any misconception of its dynamic capacity. Other than this kind of scoring, dynamic markings for celesta are sometimes missing entirely, as adding them would lack any practical meaning. At best, though, a dynamic marking for a celesta player may convey either the context of the surrounding texture, or may be intended for the conductor to help them proportion the balance within an overall passage. Either way, it could be next to meaningless in terms of any effort expended by the player, unless the passage is extremely subtle. Its first notable appearance as an orchestral solo part in the Nutcracker Ballet is somewhat misleading, as the instrument was almost completely unknown at the time. Not even Tchaikovsky was completely aware of its dynamic limitation, even after previously employing it in his opera Pan Voyevoda, and in the Nutcracker he scores fortissimo for it. Nevertheless, he made it easy for conductors to hold back their players from adding the actual force marked in the accompaniment, especially with the reduced string section numbers. But for all Tchaikovsky's careful markings and calculations, the celesta solo registers about mezzo piano within the overall orchestral dynamic, with the strings, winds, and horns lightly walking on eggshells behind it, aside from the occasional dynamic flair. Let's score read this well-known chestnut now along to the music, but with one difference. Instead of a carefully mic'd studio reference track, we'll use a live recording that more accurately reflects the natural dynamic limitations. Notice how easily the lightly scored tutti before the solo starts to overwhelm the function of the celesta, to the point where only the most careful listener can make out more than a glittering of decoration. So keep your orchestra under control when scoring featured parts for celesta, and make it sound louder simply because there's nothing standing in front of it acoustically. And if you absolutely have to score a tinkly, bell-like line in a more complex, beefier passage, use a glockenspiel or antique cymbals, or even a keyboard glockenspiel if the orchestra has access to one.